like jacuzzis. I'm not trying to front, but now I do it. I want like Lil Uzi. You do you, and I'ma do me. I've been turned over new leaves. I'm so high up in the sky, you think that I just rolled a doobie, but my drug of choice is peace. I'm so at ease, I'm trying to spread this feeling from the floor to ceiling like disease. Something crazy epidemic. Happiness is living in me just like a tenant. And I bet that if you let it in, then you'll be feeling what I'm feeling. This amazing feeling. I give you.
Hello, Kerry Hall. How is everybody? Welcome. Welcome, everyone, to STG at Kerry Hall, our brand new venue that we recently acquired just back in November. So STG is newly in the building. How do you all feel in here? Yeah? This is also one of the very first public events that we've had in this space, being STG. We, previous to STG acquiring Kerry Hall, we partnered with Cornish College of the Arts for many, many workshops, talks on this stage, performances, professional development. So it is wonderful to be back in this space and to be helping to continue its future. We're excited about that. And welcome to you all for the second Resonate. How many of you were at the first? Any hands? Awesome. Awesome. Well, welcome to those of you that are new. Welcome back to those that were at the first. We have one in June 16th as well, so I hope you come back for that one. But to get us started today, first of all, who am I? My name is Sarah Strasbaugh. I'm the Associate Director of Community Programs for STG. And STG is the Paramount, the Moore, the Neptune Theaters. We have a concert series at Remlinger Farms, and now here at Kerry Hall. We also have a partnership with Fifth Avenue Theater where we're also newly starting to do work so that we're continuing to provide arts and entertainment in the Pacific Northwest. So thank you all for being here. We're a nonprofit. We have a lot of programs that we're going to be continuing to build out in this theater, in this space, in this hub for community and education. So I hope that you all come back for all of those because education means all ages. It's not just littles, which we love them too. But tonight, we're focusing on money. Show Me the Money is the name of this. And I'm excited to welcome our guests out. First of all, I'm going to welcome our moderator for this evening. Let's give it up for Sol. Awesome. Sol, I'm going to turn it over to you from here. And actually, I'm going to go this way. Thank you so much, everybody, and enjoy.
What's up, everybody? How you doing? I'm just going to bring our panelists out. So please welcome Hollis, Budo, and Jordan Kurland. How's everyone doing today? I said, how's everyone doing? Okay, for sure. Appreciate and shout out to all of you for making this effort to be a part of conversation, to be learning, and to be open as an artist or somebody who works in music, and to try and tackle and talk about this subject that sometimes can be taboo or can be hard for artists. We're going to talk about money today, and that will be super fun, I promise. I think we'll all learn something. So real quick, before we dive into it, I just want to get like a read of who's in the room. Firstly, raise your hand if you are a musician or identify as an artist, like a performing artist. Oh, cool. Raise a hand if you work on the back end in music, management. Okay, and if you're a producer, if you're a music producer, raise your hand. Okay, very cool. This is a music producer, by the way. Artist, management. Jordan, did you make music at some stage?
No.
Oh, okay. Very rare. I have a theory. I'm a hip-hop artist myself as well, so my questions come from a perspective of being an artist. I actually have a theory that everyone has written a song at some point, but Jordan might have just proved me wrong. But yeah, very cool. And I'm also curious, raise your hand if you were at the first Resonate session. Okay, cool, just a few. Well, I love that we're in Kerry Hall. We're in a space that historically has been about people learning and being artists at a development stage. Obviously, Cornish is an art school, and now STG is holding that space for community to be able to share and kind of cross-pollinate. So this is one of the first events that's happening in that fashion. So let's make some noise for that. Cool. So I want to start by acknowledging something that's important when it comes to art. And that's, firstly, that we don't all make a living making music. And at different points of our journey, we may be working towards that. That may be something that is, a period in the past, and we're trying to either get back to that, or life has changed, and our desires and our needs in life have changed, or maybe something in our body or our journey has changed, and we're not necessarily at that place. So this conversation is not centered around making this your full-time thing, although many of us would love for that to be the truth. I'd like to have a conversation about navigating money as an artist, conversations around money, and also balancing your life, your finances around being an artist. The reality that some of us have jobs, many of us have jobs outside of making our art. And of course, for those of us that are trying to work towards making art our full thing, we have some people who have a lot of experience with that as well. So on that note, maybe you guys could quickly introduce, doesn't have to be super quick, because I do want to know about your journey. If you could just tell us a little bit about how you got started in music, kind of most specifically when you really wanted, like starting from where you were like, okay, I'm going to pursue this as like more than just me like doing something in my bedroom, or I'm going to step out into the world and make music, bring people together, whether it be started with festivals or managing bands, just kind of what that journey was like and where it has taken you. You want to start, Hollis?
No, but I'm down. Thanks all. And yeah, I'm hyped to be here. Thank you so much, STG, for having us. And yeah, so I'm Hollis, and I would say that my path as a musician and as a professional musician, I guess I would say as a career artist, really started here on Capitol Hill. I grew up in the Bay Area, and my first taste of doing my own original work was actually as a spoken word poet. And so I was involved in high school with an organization called Youth Speaks, which did poetry slams in the Bay Area. And that I was a huge hip hop fan, and I just kind of found a love of writing poetry, performing it, and moreover, just like the community of young people that were performing, and just I really got kind of like high off of like being in a community of young people that were just like so energized and so artistically driven. And I think ever since then, I really just got like, yeah, really compulsively like addicted to being in community and being in collaboration with creative people. And I was like, I'm willing to do whatever it takes, and if it means making my own work to do that, like I'm down. So moving from spoken word poetry, I actually went to college at Seattle University here on the Hill. Went to a show at Numos for the first week I was here, and just like totally fell in love. And I was like, my dream would be to perform here at Numos. And I think if you're thinking about like what was the kind of like the moment, I think just being here, being in a city that felt like so creatively charged for me, I was just like, I'll do anything to be a part of this, like, and to be part of this community. So I did Youth Speaks Seattle here. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Youth Speaks here in Seattle, but continued as a poet, met my best friend who was also a poet, and then we saw Blue Scholars perform at a festival at Seattle University, and we turned to each other and we were like, we could do this too. So we started a rap duo together called Canary Sing, and that was the band, my first band. And I never would have, I don't think, ever done music if it hadn't been for her, but we performed for 6 years together as Canary Sing, got to tour nationally, did a lot of performances for nonprofits and for colleges and universities as well. We would present workshops like in universities, like writing workshops or workshops about activism, as well as performing. And then, yeah, just falling into the Seattle scene, got to work with a bunch of different people. I tour managed, I collaborated with a bunch of folks, including Macklemore and Ryan Lewis, for their first album, The Heist. And so that was like kind of this thing that I was doing with my friends. I started doing music video producing, and really fell in love with music video production, and eventually wanted a career that pursued music videos or just like film and video as well. So yeah, I mean, fast forward like through all of the nuttiness of doing Macklemore and Ryan Lewis's Heist album. I started a band called The Flavor Blue here in Seattle with two guys that were also rappers, and we were like, we're tired of rap, we want to make new music. So we were a performing band doing electronic R&B here for 10 years, performed at all the festivals here in Seattle. And then, yeah, eventually I found myself down in Los Angeles pursuing both music and more recently film as a director and producer for music videos, commercial work, and primarily storytelling, documentary style storytelling for nonprofits and foundations. So it's been like a rollicking ride, but through all of it, just really motivated by people, creatives, and like finding community. So that's me.
I'm likely going to regret having just put a cough drop in my mouth if the rattling sound of a Ricola starts to drive you crazy. I apologize, but it's either that or coughing. So. Or both. My name is Josh. I make music under the name Budo. And yeah, I don't know if there was like a moment, like music was just kind of always the plan. Like I almost dropped out of high school, nearly failed out of college. Had no real backup options in my life. I just, I started playing music when I was like 9 or 10 and just fell in love with it. And for whatever reason, like just kind of had an early surge of delusional self-confidence and have been riding that ever since. And just kind of decided that that was what I was gonna do. Yeah, I don't know. I played in bands throughout like middle school and high school, and then started making beats in college and met some rappers, made some albums. One of them was Macklemore. There's a common theme up here, and so we made a record in 2005 that had a degree of local success, and that I parlayed that into a relationship with a couple of other artists here, and then ended up going on the road with one of them, and we started touring pretty heavily. He had somebody invest in him, and so we bought a Dodge Sprinter van and just started driving in circles around the country. And playing, for literally, like I remember playing for one person in a club called Hell in Providence, Rhode Island. That one person was my brother's best friend, my younger brother's best friend from high school, but like you just, I don't know, there's those incredibly formative years where you just kind of push through that stuff and figure out how to hone your craft and yeah, I don't know, connect with people, whether it's one person or 500, and slowly build a degree of connection and audience, across the country, and then slowly in Europe. And so that was really, that was insane. That was probably the wildest 5 years of my life, just because it was so kind of hand to mouth. Like we were struggling so much and making just enough money to pay for one Motel 6 room for like 7 people to sleep in, and then sort of slowly getting 2 hotel rooms and maybe a little bit of food, and kind of slowly figuring out how to pay for rent, and then putting bits of money here or there away. And that was like I don't know, that really forced me to, music chose me, I think, early on, but that was like it really forced me to choose music as the thing, because it was not easy. And so, yeah, I don't know, after like 4 or 5 years of that, took a little break, ended up going back on the road with the Macklemore and Ryan Lewis thing at the height of their success. And that was a wild transition from, 1,200 cap rooms to like 30 to 40 to 50,000 person festivals and stadiums and arenas and stuff across the world. So that was definitely a change of pace and welcome, because we had, beds and hotels and buses and all of that stuff. And so that was a window into a different world. And as he and Ryan sort of stopped working together in the studio, I transitioned into a primary production role with him, and we made a bunch of records, and those did well enough that I was able to stop touring. And so there was kind of this inverse curve of like, you know, for 10 or so years, like touring was the only way that money came in, and then slowly music started to kind of like creep up to like 10% of the income, and then 20% of the income, and then maybe 50% of the income, and then it got high enough that I was able to transition out of that space and into the studio, and so it's kind of where I've been ever since. And I spend my days making records and hanging out with my 4-year-old and my wife, and life's pretty good. That's where I'm at.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jordan, and I am a band manager primarily. I'm based in San Francisco, but I have very strong ties to Seattle in that I've been managing Death Cab for Cutie since 2003. So I've been spending a fair amount of time up here since then. I also recently joined the board of KXP, as KXP has launched in the Bay Area. So it's nice to be even further embedded in the community. I lied a little bit in that I did try to play music very briefly. But it was not even a real effort. When I was in high school, I took guitar lessons, and I think I got about as far as learning the first few chords to Lola by the Kinks and I Can't Explain by the Who, and that was kind of it. So I just really was much better talking on the phone. And I loved music. And when I was in college, I went into college in Southern California with no idea what I wanted to do. I thought I maybe wanted to be a psychiatrist or psychologist, which was appropriate training for my current career. But while I was at school, I started writing record reviews for the college magazine. And from that, I started getting pitched records to review from what were called college reps. And then a light bulb went off. I was like, oh wait, there's a whole industry behind this. And this is pre-internet. I'm old, right? So this is early 90s. And so I started to examine that a little bit and started to ask around a little bit. And I learned that there were record labels. I mean, not that I didn't know there were record labels, but like kind of delve into the world of record labels and management companies and got a sense what was out there. And I interned for a management company one summer in New York. And then I came back to school and I drove into LA to intern for Geffen Records the fall of 1993, which is when Nirvana's In Utero came out and the first Counting Crows record and setting up Hole's record. It was a really interesting time. A Guns N' Roses record came out. And and just from there I booked shows on campus and I started managing a friend from my college who I ended up managing until 2011, and we had a top 40 hit song in 2009 together. So that was just kind of my wayward path in, but what I figured out when I was interning at record labels and management companies and booking shows and writing reviews was I wanted to be close to the creative process, and there are very few ways to do that. On the business side, and management was one of them. I also, because I have a little bit of ADD, really wanted to do something where I was going to be able to touch a lot of different areas over the course of the day rather than being a publicist at a record label where you're pitching writers or working in promotions where you're working to get songs on radio stations. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Those are great careers. But for me, I wanted to do a little bit of everything, and I wanted to be close to the creative process. So that's what I settled on. And I graduated, moved into LA, did standard entry-level music industry jobs. I was answering phones at ASCAP, Performance Rights Society, and I got offered a job in San Francisco to work for a management company. So I moved up. The biggest client of that company at the time was Primus, and they also managed the Melvins and some other stuff. And I spent 4 years there and built up a small roster of my own, and then launched my own company in 1999. I also started working on a small music festival called Noise Pop, a small club festival in the Bay Area, which I still am involved in. And I loved everything except I was making no money. And, I felt like, being in San Francisco is not, like being in Seattle. It's not the most obvious place to be if you want to work in the music business. It wasn't my intention to wind up there. When I moved there for the job, I thought I'd be there a year or two and then go back to LA or go to New York and have a set of relationships and experiences that most people in the music industry don't have. It's just I really fell in love with San Francisco. So I wanted to give it a go there. And in 2000, I remember at the beginning of 2003, I was 31, and I said, you know what? I had recently gotten married. Thankfully, my wife was making a decent living because I was not. And you know, I said to myself, all right, I'm going to give this until the end of 2004 here. And if something doesn't give, we're going to move to LA, or I'm going to go try to get a job at a music tech company, because that was something that existed at that point in San Francisco. So, you know, fast forward to August of 2003, I heard that my friends, Death Cab for Cutie, were looking for management. They'd been managed for 5 years by themselves. And, you know, I flew up here and, you know, I beat out some much more qualified people at that point in terms of success levels, but, you know, my relationship with them really meant something, and they decided to give me a shot, you know, which was great, because I had felt for a long time like, all right, I know I'm a good painter, I just don't have the right canvas, you know, I don't have the right medium, and I think, you know, being a manager, you know, you're as successful as your clients, right? So, and there's so much involved in success as an artist, including a whole lot of luck and timing, to be honest. So it just, you know, they hired me right before a record called Transatlanticism came out, which, you know, took them from being a, you know, a pretty well-known indie rock band into being a semi-household name. And, you know, from there I was able to, you know, after a whirlwind couple of years, look around and build a company. And I feel fortunate that I'm still working with them 22 years later, and we now have, you know, a company called Brilliant Corners Artist Management. There's 15 of us, most of us in San Francisco, but we have people in LA, New York, one person here and one person in Chicago. And I, you know, not that it's always the easiest job in the world, but I feel like, you know, I'm one of the few people who I know who figured out what they wanted to do in college and is still doing it, you know, 30 plus years later. And, you know, the business, as we will get into shortly, has changed drastically since I started. And, you know, this is a business that feels like it's changes quite a bit from year to year right now. But, you know, it is possible. You know, it's possible to make a living doing it. I don't necessarily recommend it to everyone, but you can make it happen. So,
Thank you. On that note of it being possible, but not for everybody, in your experience, and this is for anyone, in your experience, what have been some of we were talking backstage about how, like, kind of the one guarantee if you're looking for longevity in music is that you're gonna have to have a tolerance for uncertainty, you're gonna have to have a tolerance for change, whether that be change in the environment, even just online. Social media is always, the platforms are changing, the way that the algorithm and the platforms interact with us change, and then the way that we make a living or just make income, period, changes. What have been the attributes that you've had to strengthen, or that you have found most useful, or that you've seen in peers of yours that have given them the tolerance for that environment to be able to sustain and hold on to their love and their career in music?
Collaboration. I think that that's the key to sort of like just being so open to bringing in new influence creatively, and then also just from like marketing. I mean, just basically for everything. I think the more you are able to remain open to connecting with people from, you know, new generations or different genres or different ways of working or different perspectives, like the more likely you are to be able to sort of adapt to the changing landscape, I think, at least from my own experience.
Does anyone have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I guess that's great. I think that's right, collaboration. And I think to that point, knowing how to work and learning how to work with different people that have different skill sets or experiences than you. I think I'd add to that, like, curiosity. I think there was a number of years, because I think in Seattle, like, we were just such a no industry town, especially in hip hop, for like so long. Like like, what is a publishing company? Like, what's a PRO? Like, that we were just out here, like, performing, collaborating, releasing music, and it just felt very, like, local economy based. And I think now, obviously, with just information being so much more accessible, and we've seen a lot of different folks, like, from Seattle rise in a way that, like, it almost seemed like only rock was viable here in Seattle, and otherwise we really had to fend for ourselves. But I've been saying all that to say, like, I think for a number of years I felt like almost like an embarrassment that I was like self-managed, you know, like whether I was managing my rap group or Flavor Blue. We had a manager for a little bit, but for the most part, like, I was mostly managing the band, leading management with my bandmates, and there was kind of this shame around it, like, oh, like if I was a real artist, then I wouldn't be self-managed. And I think a lot of what I recognize is that, like, just taking away the stigma and actually seeing the empowerment that comes from autonomy and having that agency, and being able to educate yourself, have that curiosity, learn about the music industry, ask questions in a really, like, earnest way, and learn, and really see that ability to learn as an artist, not as a detriment or as a compromise. Obviously, we wish we could be in the studio 24/7 making music all the time and not having to worry about the business, but at the same time, that empowerment that comes, and that, like, especially when things kind of go a little wayward or there's a lot of variables, and knowing how to navigate kind of tricky situations, like having that curiosity, learning, educating yourself, like, I really do feel that that's not something to feel like, oh, well, I wish I could just outsource this. Like, even when you do get to a position that you can outsource it or you'll need to outsource it because of the volume of work, like, having that ability to navigate the business, I think, is invaluable and makes you a savvy business owner, because ultimately, when you get to a place of monetizing yourself as an artist, you are a business owner, and your art becomes a business, and even if you want to have a relationship to it that is purely creative, I think it's always important to have and strengthen that acumen and not see it as a place of, like, embarrassment, but actually come to it from a place of power.
Question for you, Jordan, and for you because you've been in a band, and for you because you've collaborated with a lot of artists. When you're excited to work with somebody and you want to get busy, but there's maybe not, let's say there's not money involved yet. Is that too early to kind of sort out the business stuff, to have conversations about ownership, splitting, and when is the time that you should revisit those relationships? Like, is it like when there starts to be money coming in for people who are trying to collaborate, but trying to be mindful of the business end? How would you recommend people approach those conversations?
And I think it's always easier to figure it out before there's money coming in, you know, and just because once money starts coming in, I think it complicates things. And I think, you know, not always the case, and it's different for everybody, but, you know, I think you wanna try to figure that stuff up as early as possible. If you co-write a song, not saying you have to, like, figure it out the day you're in the studio doing it, but, you know, try to figure it out before that song is out in the universe. That's my opinion on it. I think that, you know, if you're fortunate enough that it gets to a place where money's coming in, I think it just becomes more emotional, in my opinion, you know? And look, sometimes it goes, you know, sometimes people try to renegotiate anyway, but it's just, I think having that conversation early is less complicated.
I'll follow up, and this is a little bit of, like, not quite switching gears, but talking about those same bands, maybe when we're thinking about artists that have not yet monetized a fan base, but they have something that seems like you can build on. It might be the music, it might be the live show, there's some sort of tangible thing that you can see that can be scaled. How do you articulate that? Is that something that you can work on? And then I'll follow up and talk about, like, is there some ways that artists who are coming up should be monetizing themselves even really early on? Like, what are some of those ways when it comes to, like, sources of income for, like, a developing band?
Is that for me specifically, or
Yeah,
just,
for you, and then for yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, in terms of the first question, right, you know, if you're talking about live performance and you're in a band or you're collaborating, you're going to want to know how's the money being split up once you're getting paid, right? Whether that's $100 or $10,000. You know, is every band member going to be paid evenly? Is a certain band member going to be getting more money because, you know, they're the quote-unquote key person, or because they're doing more work to arrange for the shows, so they get a little bit more? You know, those are things to think about. And then when you're talking about recorded music, it's, you know, all right, we're releasing a record, whatever that means in today's age. You know, how are we dividing up the album royalties? How are we dividing up the publishing if we're writing these songs, right? And, you know, some bands have formulas for it, and some bands take it song by song. And I think that, you know, when it comes to the publishing, but those are, you know, those are kind of, I mean, this is very loose, like there's things within that world, right? There's merch that comes along with live shows, and there's sound exchange royalties and performance royalties, et cetera, but just those are the basic things when you're starting out that you want to really think about, you know. And there's also, is someone, you know, have a little bit more money, so they're paying for, you know, they're covering the rehearsal space, so they're paying for the recording, and then how does that get factored in, because they, you know, into it. So it's just really, you know, I'd say don't get too complicated early on, but I think trying to figure out, you know, the basics is a good thing. You know, don't get hung up on, like, you know, every possible income stream, but like get a sense of what the ones that are gonna be coming down first and try to figure those out.
Thank you. Does anybody have anything to add to that? No?
Yeah, I think it's extremely important to get that stuff sorted out pre-release, probably post-creative process, but definitely pre-release. I think the one thing I would stress is that I would not risk an otherwise healthy relationship over relatively small percentages. I think that it's easy, you know, before something goes out into the world, to get kind of hyper-focused on, you know, whether you deserve 35% versus 40%, or the other person actually didn't do the thing that they're doing, or they say they did, so they might deserve 10% less or something. But I think at the end of the day, like, you know, as long as what you've agreed upon is, or what's being proposed is in the ballpark of fair, I generally, from my end, err on the side of, like, generosity in that space, with the interest of just kind of making sure, you know, 35% of $100 is a lot more than 40% of zero at the end of the day. So I think, you know, there's always a line, and you have to kind of check in with yourself and make sure that you're being taken care of fairly. But I would not go to blows over relatively small percentages, is my advice on that tip.
Cool.
Yeah, and I'll just add, just as somebody who was in a band, and, you know, we were in a situation where it was, all three of us were vocalists. The two guys that I worked with were the co-producers. I mean, when you guys, only a few people raised their hand as a producer, and my hope is that eventually everybody who raised their hand as an artist will also feel empowered in the future to raise their hand as a producer. But I think for me and for the band, we realized early on, first, that, like, we wanted to have a type of equity. We all brought different strengths to the table, but, like, that splitting everything three ways, like, for all master recordings and all publishing, like, even if it was a song that, for example, like, I didn't even feature on as a vocalist, like, that it would be agreed upon that I would still retain 33% of publishing and 33% of the master recording, unless we were collaborating with somebody else, then we'd do it, like, more responsibly. Just as kind of like a demonstration of our equal investment in the project. And I think for us, that made things simple, because it meant that we didn't have to negotiate this, like, well, I wrote all of the lyrics, like, I really should be getting X, Y, and Z, and that we saw it as, like, a larger project. That's the way that we decided to do it. Other people can do it different ways. But I think one thing I just wanted to add really quick is that when there is income coming in, just making sure that you're saving enough of your income for baseline costs that are collective costs before they split out into individual payouts. Taxes.
Taxes.
Just save 20%, just do it. Maybe even 25. But just thinking about like ensuring, like what we thought about is like the band actually should be making like the vast majority of our income, and so we save that for our future recordings so that we're not having to individually pay out for like mixing sessions, mastering sessions, recording sessions, all of the things that come with tour. And then we can collectively decide, okay, like where are we gonna splurge? Where are we gonna get like a nice hotel instead of crashing on, or not a nice hotel ever, a hotel, period, instead of crashing on a floor, or like, you know, where we can kind of think about how are we making these decisions collectively. And being actually a little more conservative about how we are each getting paid out individually. I think that is something that it's just like important. You can even use the money conversation to just be like a general philosophical and like emotional agreement with your bandmates about like, this is how we're deciding to be in relationship and in like accountability with each other. I think those things like forming an LLC with other people, like determining masters and publishing splits, like all of those are like tact or like kind of unsexy ways that you can have these larger conversations about like what does it mean for us to be in working relationship with each other, and this like huge commitment we're making to each other. So that's all I'll say.
Yeah, and I also just want to say quickly, you know, there's no exact formula for it. It is about figuring out what's right for that situation. I do think you know it's about, you know, Wave clients. You know, we have 20 or so clients as a company, and everyone does it a little bit different. You know, one client where there's one primary songwriter gives a quote-unquote token percentage of the publishing to each band member for their, you know, for what they do and all the other aspects of the band. Some artists, you know, some songwriters don't do that at all. You know, there's a relatively famous story of, you know, Nirvana split the publishing evenly, and then towards the end of Nirvana, Kurt Cobain came back and said he was keeping 100% of the publishing for himself. You know, I don't advocate for that strategy, but you know, but yeah, and I think, you know, once you start making some money as a band, I do think that that's really great advice to set some aside, whether it's rehearsal space costs, touring costs, et cetera, because it gets expensive, and we do that with all of our clients. Who, you know, we make sure that there's always some money sitting in the account for whether it's planned expenses or quote unquote rainy day expenses.
So I want to talk about a different aspect of making money beyond just this proverbial or this like hypothetical like money coming in, and think about maybe some examples of artists, whether it be people that you work with or things that you've done in the past when it comes to trying to navigate the fact that streaming is kind of in a weird place right now, and the economy's kind of in a weird place, and there is no like surefire guaranteed like just like money making like schemes, but there are like trusted things that we can do that some of them may seem very baseline, but that's kind of what I want to know about. It's like, if you're really crossing your T's and dotting your I's, like when you play your hometown show, like new merch, right? Maybe an example is like having merch that's specific to that show. Like really just some boxes to check when it comes to like, I'm doing the most thorough baseline things as an artist to cover the fact that I have a support base. Because, spoiler alert, doesn't matter where you're at in your journey, you have a support base. It may be people you grew up with, it may be people in your family, it may be 10 people. But you can rally those people, and if we give them opportunities to support us, we'll be blown away that they did. Here's a quick example. I've been a touring and performing artist for 15 plus years. I just had my album release party. I just had my first VIP meet and greet. It took me so long to do a VIP meet and greet because I came up in the school of thought where it was like, you go to the merch table after the show, and that's part of it. And I just like, I couldn't imagine myself charging to meet me. But then I sat down and I thought about, how can I make a special experience for the people who want an opportunity to support me on a higher level? They will be happy to support me on a higher level, and I can give them an experience that I feel is a unique, powerful experience that is not happening when you go to the venue at 8 p.m. when the doors open. And so I had a whole experience that started at 6 p.m. and a whole part of my set showed songs that I didn't perform otherwise, and merch that other people couldn't get, and all this stuff. And I left feeling like I was really giving something of quality, and I made almost as much money on the VIP as you do on your walkaway in the show sometimes, even though it's a smaller group of people. So what are some examples of, like, regardless of where you're at in your journey, things that you've seen, that's my answer, things that you see in artists that are finding a way to rally their support group beyond just asking them to give them a fraction of a penny every time they stream on Spotify?
I think VIP experiences is one. I think we have any, I think we have one artist doing that. It's not, I think probably for many of the reasons you felt that way. Many of our clients are kind of allergic to that concept. Although it's a smart one, and a lot of artists do it, and it's a way to make money. And I think you have to, and especially in this day and age where you are talking about a fraction of a penny per stream, where you look at your audience, your fans, and you have your passive fans, you have your regular fans, and you have your super fans. And doing VIP experiences is catering to your super fans, and there's nothing wrong with that, especially if you're giving them something of quality. If you're like, oh, here's a VIP experience, you get to go to the venue early and you get like a lithograph, that doesn't feel really substantial. Doing something that feels really special, that really honors, and honors their fandom is that's a nice thing to do. But, I think with merch, like, it depends on the artist, but one of our clients, Tori Moi, he's very creative, he's a graphic designer, he's an artist, and he does kind of like capsule collection merch drops. And throughout the year on his website, where it's, limited items, and they sell pretty quickly generally, and they're higher price. That wouldn't work for, let's say the new pornographers who have an older audience. But for Chaz and Toro, it's great. I think with, some clients you look at, what we've started doing, Substacks for a couple of our clients where we think that's going to appeal to their fan base. We manage a punk rock band from Toronto called Pup, and they have a very rabid base. We launched a Substack for them, and that's going to be bringing in, not passively, because for that to work, you have to actually be engaged with the platform, and you have to give good quality content, but that's going to make them extra money every year, and maybe keep them from having to tour as much as they've been touring. So you just have to kind of, look at the tools that are out there, many of which didn't exist, before the bottom fell out on recorded music, right? And I think, there are things that have come in to take its place, and there are different, every year, there's kind of something that might work, something that might not work. You can't game a TikTok moment, right? But you can look at some of these services and say, okay, my fans would love getting a special newsletter for me, or subscribing to a private SoundCloud where I'm going to put demos up, and they're going to pay me $10 a month, and they're going to get a couple songs a month, et cetera, et cetera. And I think, last thing I'll say in it, and I'll pass the mic, but I also think, fans, certainly with certain type of artists, fans want to support that artist because they know it's not easy. And if you're giving them something to support, something of quality, it doesn't feel like a super transactional thing. It feels like, hey, here's a way that I get to support this artist that I love. And, for the artist, here's a way to be creative in a way that I didn't have the means or the method to do just a few years ago.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And I just want to add, this is really quick, and I'm sure like most of the people in this room know this, but like getting fans' emails is so much more important than growing any followership on any social media platform, right? Because ultimately, that's the number one way you can directly access your audience, your fan base. So now I've been releasing music as a solo artist, and I'm working on my sophomore album release. And I used to be way more focused on like streaming and like trying to get editorial looks, and I'm really right now focused entirely on like how can I have the most like direct to audience experience, and curating that. And obviously, like, yeah, sure, I'll like take a playlist from Spotify or whatever, but like I think for me, my attention now is how can I convert my audience from social to something that I actually own, where I have people's like names, email addresses, locations. I think Bandcamp is a really great way to facilitate that, and just ensuring that you're uploading your music to Bandcamp. Like when you distribute your stuff on DistroKid and everything goes on Spotify, Apple Music, what have you, making sure that you really build out and actually try to get people to hit the Bandcamp first. You can do pay what you can. They could say $0, but you get their email address. They could say $20, and you could get their email address. But I really advocate for thinking about how can I get folks to a place where not only could they pay me actual cash instead of fractions of a penny for listening to my music and find a way to support, but how can I retain their contact information so that if I do a capsule merch drop, if I do VIP experiences for my tour that maybe the venue's not particularly promoting, how can I have the most direct thing and build my own audience that I actually own instead of interfacing with a tech company that doesn't care about any of us.
I think just to add on to that a little bit too, I think that this sort of sheer the breadth of options of extracurricular marketing and sales opportunities can feel extremely overwhelming. And so I would just say that to really check in with yourself about which of those options feels genuine for you. TikTok is not going to feel genuine for everybody, and a Substack is not going to feel genuine for everybody. But if you're somebody that really likes to write, then maybe the Substack is for you. And if you're somebody that really loves to make short form video content, then maybe one of the other options is for you. But just to not feel the pressure to participate in every one of these just because it's available to you, but to really make sure that whatever you do, that it's something that you enjoy and also something that you feel like you can sustain. Because I think, a Substack or a Patreon account, those are really appealing, but they also take a lot of work. And so you want to make sure that once you get that first 100 people through the door, the first 10 people or whatever, that you're able to kind of continue to pump out content in a way that honors the fact that they are giving you $10 a month or whatever it is. So just a thought there.
Yeah, and I would just add, because I think that there are artists and people who just bite off more than they can chew, and they start taking people's money and then aren't able to really fulfill what they're trying to accomplish on those platforms. And it's not one size fits all. And just also to the point about emails, and thank you for bringing that up. I think one very important thing about that is people move off of platforms, right? If you were big on Facebook, you're not necessarily, you're not getting that data, and people aren't on Facebook anymore, right? I mean, maybe they are for an older band, but, and they're going to move off of Instagram at some point too. And certainly Death Cab had a huge MySpace following, right? So you just have to, the one thing, people change email addresses and unsubscribe, but that is the only tried and true way that you can have direct interaction with your fans over a long period of time.
Cool. I got one more question that I want to open it up for a group conversation. We're going to pass around some microphones. Before I get into this question, one thing that I want to touch on real quick, and you can add to this, is you kind of mentioned in passing something I think is really powerful. I call it it kind of sounds like pyramid scheming, but it's this pyramid of your fans. And it's what do you call it? The passive listeners, active listeners, and then your most engaged people. And I think of this as people who have heard my music or your music, and they've passively acknowledged that they've heard it and that they maybe like it, but they haven't gone so far, and you can correct me or add to this, they haven't gone so far that they've subscribed on or followed on multiple platforms and are maybe sharing it with their friends, but they're aware of you, and they've probably decided, I think I like this. And then the people who are more engaged are the ones who have done what I said, and they've actively are engaging, they're commenting, and they're engaged, and they're streaming you, they're maybe even adding you to playlists. But they haven't gone that extra step where it's as soon as you announce a show, they're buying tickets. This is the top of the triangle. They're buying tickets. You drop merch, they're buying that merch right away. You come out with a Substack, they're subscribing to Substack. There's a famous essay that's kind of become a saying by a European economist, music economist. If you have 1,000 fans at the top of that triangle, you are a working, successful artist. You are making, if 1,000 fans are giving you $100 a year in some form, concert ticket, merch, that's $100,000 a year. If you're a solo artist, after taxes, it's more than a lot of people make in a year, right? And so that's an interesting thing that we could have a whole conversation about, and you could follow up, but I really want you guys to be able to talk, is how do you just think about that when we go home? Like, how do we get those casual people? How are we creating engagement and like a real connection that they become more engaged, and then, you know, we can build those relationships over time? Do you have anything you wanted to add to that?
And I think, yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, one thing that, you know, and it kind of goes back to what we were all talking before too. It's like, it's not a one size fits all, and, you know, not every platform is gonna be the way to develop that. But I think that, you know, I still believe, you know, keeping an air of mystery is important as an artist. And I think keeping some separation, you know, I think people want to look up on stage, not necessarily at us, but, you know, people want to look up at stage and feel like this person is something different than they are, right? Like they have that quality of something that's very special. And I think that, you know, over communicating on social media, and it's not this way for everybody, but over communicating could kind of rub that off a little bit. And I think one of the, you know, what we found in terms of like kind of, I don't want to say paywalling it, but, you know, when you talk about a Substack, right, like you're giving, it's more planned, thoughtful content, and there's a little bit more of, it feels a little bit less pandering, right? And I think as an artist, you know, you're not, like, okay, take Death Cab for example. They've been around a long time. They're almost 50. Some of them are 50, right? And, you know, when you think about, okay, how are we going to embrace TikTok? It's not like we're going to try to do the Soul Meets Body two-step on TikTok, right? It's like, okay, this is an important platform. You know, we're not going to master it in this way, but it's like, okay, so what are we going to do? Well, we're just going to put the same content up here that we would put on Instagram stories, right? It might be the band walking on stage. It might be a clip of a sound check. It might be, you know, someone in the dressing room talking about a record they love, you know? And so you have to really look at like these different platforms. A, are they right for you? And B, just because it works for another artist, it's not necessarily going to work for you. But that's getting away from the superfan thing. But I think that, yeah, I mean, it can sometimes feel like, okay, am I like taking advantage of these fans? Am I asking too much? But I think if you do it in a thoughtful way, it's not at all. And it actually keeps engagement, because there's so many options out there right now. And people's attention spans it's not anyone's fault. It's just, think about the input we're faced with on a daily basis, just from that guy in DC. You know, it's like, you just have to like, you know, so if you can create this engagement, it's actually just going to deepen the relationship and probably make it last longer. So.
Okay, get your questions ready. This is going to be rapid fire. See if you can do it kind of rapid fire. I want to know, because a couple of us talked about this at different points when I reached out to you about doing this. What is something you wish you learned sooner? Something you wish you could tell your younger self about music and money?
I wish I had learned, music. Okay, I was just going to say money and music. Okay, no, never mind. I had something for just music. Go ahead.
What's something about money and music? I think that I wish I just didn't worry about it as much. I mean, you have to, but like, I think can I flip the question a little bit? I know this is rapid fire. This is not rapid fire at all. But I think it's about, I think I will say that one thing that I take from when I was younger, and we were talking about this in the dressing room, is like, that like scrapping and scrounging is still important now, right? Like, when you're trying to like really make this career work, and every nickel counts and every dime counts, and you're trying to figure out like, you know, it still requires that mentality on some extent. And, you know, it's not because it's like this capitalistic thing. It's just like, it's really hard to make money in this business. And there's a lot of, and record companies in particular are really good at hiding pennies and nickels, you know? So you have to try to figure out, like, you have to be really smart about trying to cover it. So I think, for me, I wish I knew, now I'm coming back to the question. I think what I would say is like, I wish not that I appreciated the struggle, but I wish I understood that the struggle was really giving me an education on an aspect of the industry that I'd be still needing 30 years later.
I think that if you are lucky enough to make money making music, the things that will make you that money come from some degree of saying fuck it. Like some amount of just like not calculating and just paying attention to your heart and making art that feels genuine and that connects with people. And I think that if that stuff, if you are blessed enough for that, the product of that process to generate income, it can be very hard to maintain that sort of like fuck it approach, because money can just change your brain. And so I would just say that you just work as hard as you can to preserve your connection to the art and to your heart and to the process of creating things, because it's, as you know, the older you get and the longer you go, and you know, hopefully the more money you make, the harder it is to connect with that spirit. And so I would just, I don't know if that's kind of dodging the question, but
No, that's great.
it's like,
Thank you for that answer.
Yeah, I resonate with that in that, like, I think it's a lifelong journey for me, but like I think protecting the music creation process from ever thinking about how you're going to monetize it, like that I think has been so important. Like even when you feel the pressures and the burning desire to want to make art your living. I mean, the two things I was going to say, the snappy things. One is that having a full-time job or a part-time job doesn't make you any less of a valid artist. It doesn't make you any less of a creative. And we have to do what we have to do, not only like under capitalism all the time, but especially now, right? With all the volatility and the unknowns, like you need to take care of yourself, your well-being, your health. And I think protecting your relationship to your music and to your creative process above all else is like so vital. The other thing I was gonna say is like, kind of related to that, is like something I've learned in my journey is free is expensive. Like anything that's free is gonna cost you in some way. And I learned that really early on when I was first recording, and we had $0 for recording. And so you go and you find the dude that's down to record you for free. And you learn what that costs you at the end of the day. And like that costs you the amount of time that person's gonna spend on the music, that costs you the amount of time it's gonna take that person to send you the stuff. That's gonna take you having to like kick it with the person and like be fake friends with them, because you're taking, you know, just respect people and pay them, and respect yourself and pay people to do stuff. And
amen.
I think, and it goes through all of it. And I think even now, like when I do my own music video projects for my own own stuff, it's like I am often paying people like under their market rate, especially in LA where people, but like I think just the transparency of like money always kind of sucks to talk about, but it's always gonna suck less if you talk about it up front. I think and it's always gonna suck more the later you go on it, and the more people do stuff for you, the more you do stuff for people without having that uncomfortable conversation up front. So whatever it is, like eat the frog or whatever, like. And it's like, I'm sorry, I know you usually get paid $900 a day. I have $500. If you don't want to do this, it's all good. But if you're down for the ride, let's go, and let's get it in writing. Like that, I think is just so much easier to handle up front than having the like, we're down for the love, right? Free is expensive. All right.
Thank you, Hollis.
We're terrible at rapid fire. I'm sorry.
The longest, shortest answer.
Those are great answers, and I just want to like put a bullet point in the one where it's like, sure, this is a conversation about making money through our art, but there is actually this beautiful Venn diagram moment where what we do that is best for our spirit and best for the art is also the best way of making art that is going to do something for us in our career, is by making something that is emotionally powerful, that resonates with people, that is authentic, that is from the heart. When we step into the creative process, that's the best bet we have at doing something that's gonna help us outside of that booth, is like make something real and genuine and that makes us feel something. That's the most likely way that someone else is gonna feel something.
Which is a crazy contradiction, because money introduces a degree of fear into conversations and it's your brain, and like the only way to triumph is to be fearless creatively. And so you really have to like battle those two things and kind of compartmentalize them as best as you can.
Cool. All right, who has like a question or a topic that you wanna steer the conversation into? We have folks with microphones. Maddie has a microphone over here. Danae has one over there. Let's take this one in the front first over here.
Thank you. Hello.
Hi.
Thanks for doing this, everybody. This is so awesome. I have a question mainly for you, Hollis, but I would be curious on you too if you have answers. But you were talking about, you're like, I did this, I did this, I did this, I did this, which is so awesome. I'm curious on what your transition process was like. Like, for example, oh, I'm doing spoken word poetry and then I want to get into filmmaking. Was it kind of like, I'm just gonna try it and like see what happens and like dip my toe and find cool people, or like how did that work?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've literally had like 120 jobs like throughout my life, and I'll probably have like another 50 or so more. And even now, like I own my own film production company. Like on paper, we do a bunch of other things, but it was really born out of like the first time I did a music video. I was like literally like a fan of Macklemore and Ryan Lewis, and then my friend was like, I'm directing a music video for them, do you want to produce it? And I was like, I don't know what that means, but yeah, I'm down. And so I produced a music video for them, and it took forever, but I didn't know what I was doing, but I was down, and like I was down to figure it out. And I learned so much. I fell in love with like the process of video making and filmmaking. And I mean, that was like for performing too. I performed for free for so long. And that was like so much of the folks that I knew in the Seattle scene. Like we just did hella free gigs until people started offering us money. And then we learned, you know, and at a certain point you're like, oh, I'm getting taken advantage of at this level. I'll ask for this much. And then you just kind of move it up from there. But then that's like what I'm talking about here, but like I was an Airbnb host, I was an SAT tutor, I was like serving or I was like hosting at a restaurant in Madison Park. Like I did all sorts of other hustles to like also make it work. I taught poetry in like after school programs, like just doing everything I could to just kind of keep myself as flexible as possible and avoid a 9 to 5 as long as possible, to just kind of like just to be able to say yes to opportunities as they arrived, and not to like really see it and be like, oh well, what's in it for me, or like how much can I make from this, but really like what can I learn from this, who can I work with for this, and who do I want to learn from for this. And I think like that's what I've always done throughout my career, is just kind of like, how can I get myself into situations where like I can be a value add, where I'm bringing something, even if it's just like energy and downness to the table, but I can be somebody that people can rely on and that people like ideally think I'm like, you know, want to spend time around, and then I can soak up game and then also be a resource to them. I think so much of like being successful in this industry, or really in any industry, is like figuring out like how can I be a resource, and like what do I need to learn to do that. So yeah, I don't know if that's a clear answer to your question, but I think it's just, yeah.
Thanks. Yeah.
My question is mainly about social media. I feel like right now, being an artist, in any conversation about being an artist, social media is sort of like the center point of it, and it wasn't like that like maybe even 10 years ago. So I'm just interested in your opinions. Do you think that in 2025, it's just a hard truth that if you want to be an artist, you have to be a social media influencer? Or do you think someone that just loves to write songs, or they just like to sing, or like Mariah Carey in 1990, do you think that's even possible now?
No, I'm sorry. I wish it was. It just, like, the sort of, you know, the Frank Oceans of the world, and like, I remember when The Weeknd arrived, and it just felt like he appeared in this puff of smoke from Canada, and like no one had any idea where he came from.
Well, actually, his whole thing was like that people didn't know what he looked like for like the first few
he was
EPs.
Like the greatest mystery ever, and you know, I mean, I'm sure like maybe once a generation, there's somebody like that can kind of triumph over the noise, but in my world, like it just, I think to kind of get back to that question about, you know, the cornucopia of options, like it doesn't have to be TikTok, it doesn't have to be Instagram, it doesn't have to be like any specific thing, but it does have to be one of those. And I think it's just, it is, and I would love to be proven wrong, and you guys might disagree, and I would be so pumped if you did, but the reality for the folks that I work with is just that's some version of that, and a genuine, sustained, consistent version of that is just an undeniable reality of of the world we're in right now.
Yeah, I think you, I mean, you don't have to be an influencer, but you have to have a presence. You know, that's just the reality of it. And I, often say to my clients that we are in the content business as much as we are in the music business in this day and age. And, I think you just have to, it's a necessary evil, but also look at it, it's like free billboard space too, right? Like this is a way as crappy as it can be sometimes that it exists, 20 years ago, you couldn't connect with your fans directly like this, right? So you just have to figure out how it works for you, and don't let it overtake your life, and I think it's important to just be authentic and use it wisely and use it in a way that's comfortable. That's it, So, not that that's simple, but that is how.
Are you looking at me?
Yeah.
I'm just the moderator.
Yeah.
No, I think we could have a whole resonate about social media, and maybe next year we should. I think that the underlying point to your question about how it's not for all of us and how it's a quite toxic and unhealthy environment a lot of times is super valid, especially for us highly sensitive people who turn to art because the way we are. I think we have to I think it is a reality that this is how people interact with art a lot these days, and the silver lining is that we can use that as a through line to real life experiences, which remind us that these are real people on the other end of it. And so there is a beauty side to it where it's like I have this megaphone where I can reach other real people who feel the same way about life or have the same questions or the same fears or the same emotions. They're connecting to my music, and I can now reach real other people on the other end. These are not just comments or numbers. These are actual people. And then I try to emotionally detach myself from the immediate results as well. Even though, of course, the algorithm wants me to respond to comments in the first 10 minutes and all that. I really have to just kind of think about these are message in a bottle. Every time that I put something out into the internet, it's like a message in a bottle, and the more things that we put out, the more opportunities, the more people are going to receive those messages, and things will come back to us. So I try to humanize it. Think about all the other people on the other end of that, like, phone, Yeah.
But
I wish we could, we can't all be like, and even someone like Frank Ocean and Kendrick, they're from a previous version of the internet. And by the way, when Frank came out, he was tweeting all the time. And he was on Tumblr a lot. He would do these amazing blog entries that were part of the reason why people connected with him. Yeah.
I think it's also just important to note that you don't have to try to make money with music. Like, you just don't have to. Like, you can create art for yourself, you can create art for your friends. Like, it can be at the highest possible level. Like, introducing the business side of it is terrible and really uncomfortable and can be very, very painful and could sometimes work, and most of the time it doesn't. And that's obviously what we're talking about right now, but you don't have to. Like, it's not a requirement to be an artist. You don't have to market yourself. You don't have to engage in these things if they don't feel good. And I think that's, like, we're living in a world that sort of, like, conditions us to think that the only way to value ourselves and the only way to value the things that we do is if other people enjoy them. And
if we're a professional.
Yeah, and it's just not true. It's not true. And so I think it's an insane line of work. And so I think you really have to make sure that the sort of the business aspect of it, like, is appealing to you. And if it's not, it doesn't diminish the artistic side of it at all.
Yeah, I think it's and something that hopefully it goes without saying, because we are sitting up here talking about monetization and money, but it's like the art comes first. End of story. And that's why I think anyone who's here as an artist is here, is because they love creating art, not because they want to be. Maybe it's because you also want to be rich and famous, but ultimately, it's about the art. And I think that even within our roster of clients, everyone's running a little bit of a different race. Not everyone's trying to get as far up the road or as high on the mountain. And I think it's important to just really have a sense, and in life, too, just to like really have a sense of what is enough and what are you trying to accomplish, and constantly be checking in on that. I think what's interesting about maybe not all, but most of our clients, I think they are all, for the most part, pleasantly surprised that they're musicians still, that they are making some sort of living doing this, that they're able to go out on the road and tour. And there's different degrees. We have artists who go on the road and tour and they still have day jobs. We have artists obviously who have not worked in a long time, but almost all of them are just pleasantly surprised that they get to do this, because I don't think any of them set out thinking that, oh my God, I'm going to be a successful musician. I think it was just baby steps along the way. Like, I just want to be able to leave my job for 3 weeks and tour, for example. So just don't put too much pressure on yourself, I think, is the theme about like monetizing or becoming famous. Just do it because you love it, and but also don't be naive that just think because if you build it, people are going to come, because you do have to also, if you are trying to achieve a level of success, there is engagement with these platforms we're talking about.
Yeah. All right, let's get some more questions. How about over there? He had a quick hand.
Thank you very much. One, thanks for sharing your perspective. Super helpful and interesting. So Budo mentioned that somebody he toured with had an investor that like invested in him. Is that a common thing? And if so, can you share like a little bit more about how that potentially works? Coming from the startup world, that seems very interesting and like an interesting avenue to explore. So I'd love to learn more about that.
That's a good question. That's a unique case in the sort of 20 years that I've been doing this. In many ways it was similar to taking on like the investment of a record label. I think a record label is also an investor. In a lot of ways it needs to see an exceptionally high return on investment before you see a profit. It was an interesting model. It's one that I think is probably worth trying to replicate in some capacity. Anytime you take investment, this is investment from an individual. There was, I think, an it's just complicated. It can get complicated, but money's complicated. so I don't know. It was functional. It was definitely a functional experience, and I'll say this. I think it enabled a lot at that period in our careers that would not have otherwise been possible. And it gave us the opportunity to work exceptionally hard with some additional resources that gave us, I think, a leg up over people that obviously didn't have that. So, and we had to work hard to pay it back. so there was that piece of it. But there's interesting. I don't know. There's obviously crowdsource funding, and there's a new service like Indify maybe that allows a little bit of like you can go in, I think, as an artist and post your profile, and then various kind of a la carte services like distributors and labels and marketing firms and maybe investors too can kind of come in and give offers based on whether or not they think you're a viable artist. I haven't explored it that much, but I think that's like an interesting sort of possible twist on like the record label model.
And there's also a sort of, God, I'm totally spacing on the name of it, but there's a company that's doing short-term loans for artists too. So like, hey, I want to make a record on my own, take a $50,000 loan, and I don't think it's great interest rate, but whatever. I think something I would add to the investor thing, and I think it's also, I had a client who did a publishing deal early on, and not that early on, but before he was really making money, and it was not a big publishing deal, but it was enough that he was able to, quit his job and buy a van and go on tour. And he then had some real success later and was kind of regretting, the publishing deal he did at that point. But I think, and I had to remind him that like, without that publishing deal, who knows if we wind up here, right? So you have to also evaluate like, is $50,000 worth more than $250,000? $50,000 not worth more than $250,000 in 7 years, as far as launching your career and getting you where you I think as far as the investor model, I'll say, it is rare. It's something we come across. I'll say as a manager, when you come across an artist that has an investor, it's almost always a red light. It's just hard because more often than not, and I'm not saying it was your case, but more often than not, that investor is taking advantage of the artist and has locked them into a really crappy deal. So,
I mean, all money is expensive.
Yeah.
Yes. A high interest rate loan is expensive. Record label money is exceptionally expensive. But the one sort of glint of hope in a record deal is that you don't have to pay it back. And you have to pay it back to make money, but you're never going to be like taken to court to pay back your advance. So that is something to consider. But I think to sort of your point about and to the point about the artists who maybe regretted taking that deal, it's like, wait as long as you possibly can to take money from somebody else. And if that means you have to, work a job and make music all night long and show up at that job exhausted in the morning, do that for as long as you can physically handle, because, you'll just be in a point of leverage. The longer you wait, the more leverage you have. And the longer you wait, hopefully, you don't have to take somebody else's money because you've started to generate enough income on your own that it's not necessary. So.
Cool. I want to do like 10 minutes of kind of rapid. You don't have to be so fast, but I want to get to more questions, and maybe we can have a goal. Those are all great answers, and it makes me wish we had more time. But I want to try to cover like a few more topics. So it's like if someone nails it, then we'll just go to the next question.
We'll have the goal of answering at least 2 questions over 10 minutes. How's that sound for everybody?
Or if Hollis gives a really good answer, I'm just going to let that rock. So who's next?
I just want to pivot for a second, give a shout out. This is Michael from Aurora Avenue. He was... they were participants in another program that we have called More Music at the More, and they just booked Capitol Hill Block Party. So happy for you.
Michael, do you have a question? No? Okay, question next door to Michael.
Hi, I appreciate all your time. My name is Hallie. I'm an artist manager of a group called West of Eden from Seattle. Quick question, kind of touch more on, you talked about deals. I wanted to touch more on the legal aspect of this career. I think it's kind of underspoken amongst artists. I'm curious what your experience has been with that. Have you ever had to emergency retain a lawyer? It was really expensive, or how have you protected yourselves as artists in your careers?
Do I look like I have a lawyer? I have a lawyer. I love my lawyer. He's the best. Yeah, there's 2 legal models. There's one where you pay by hour. There's one where you pay commission. I have always found the commission model to be a little bit more viable because I don't feel guilty calling him for advice, and he's invested in my career and has been helpful in a lot of ways outside of just being my lawyer. But yeah, I really need him probably twice a year, and then the rest he's helpful with kind of contracts and et cetera for the rest of the year. But there's probably once or twice a year where he's saved my life. so yeah, very valuable, I think.
5% is sort of I don't know what you're obviously, but 5% is really kind of the standard for attorneys if you're going to commission versus hourly.
That's 5% across everything.
Yeah, you could negotiate, obviously. I'm sorry, I know it's rapid fire, but yes. We'll keep it for simplicity.
I'm just going to say I've never had a lawyer on commission. I've always paid by the hour, and I think there's tiers of lawyers. There's some who are the people that would the high-end folks, and then there's people that are kind of more just crank out the contracts. And I think it's always just really good to ask your peer group to see who has a good lawyer and can kind of give a warm lead. I think I've always just been able to ask around for the community and see who has a good relationship with their lawyer. I think the best lawyers, for the best relationships I've had, are people that you feel comfortable asking them to explain things to you so that you understand them, so that when you encounter them in contracts, when you're reading them, short form contracts, you feel capable of doing that and that you don't have to pay for that. Long form contracts, anything, publishing deal, record label, anything like that, that's not a completely standard thing, absolutely have a legal professional look at it before you sign.
ChatGPT is your friend. Seriously, feed that shit in there, it'll summarize it. It's really, really helpful.
All right, next question. How about over there?
Hey, my question is about, speaking of ChatGPT, it's about AI and any personal stories about how you might have used AI as a productive, creative tool in your creative process. For example, for me, the first song I produced and recorded music, and the first song I ever got mastered, I paid someone $50 to do that. Right now, I have a subscription to a distributor that has AI mastering, and virtually I'm mastering my tracks, which is like $100 a year. And so now, that's maybe ideas of monetization and how this AI can be a tool, and maybe personal stories about how you've used it in your creative process.
I love it. I was really scared of it for a while, and then now I'm not. And I think that it's going nowhere. It's definitely just, it's present, and it can be a valuable tool in sort of a songwriting space, and it can also be extremely valuable for sort of parsing complicated legal language in ways that make it intelligible for the rest of us. But on the creative side, yeah, I mean, I think it's only going to become more pervasive, and I think the more you understand it and the more you're able to, like, these things are only as smart as you sort of like are able to direct them. They're not proactive, they're reactive. And so I think the more you're able to sort of harness their power in ways that like are incredibly creative and sort of bespoke to you, then the cooler they are. So
Yeah, I think it's obviously it's a very personal choice as an artist, and there's obviously the existential thing of where is AI gonna go, and there's a lot of messed up things already happening with AI. But I think about a friend's dad who was an illustrator, and I remember when digital illustration started to become a thing, he was super resistant to it. He like illustrated graphic novels and cartoons and stuff, and he resisted all technology. And ultimately, he ended up kind of getting phased out of his profession because he wasn't able to find out how is he going to navigate that landscape that's changing. So even if we don't fully embrace and use AI, I think understanding kind of how do we fit in and how is it affecting what we do, I think is advantageous. And yeah, that's all I'll say to that. Can we get another question? All right.
Hi. A couple of you have touched on sort of the like media saturation that the public is inundated with, and just sort of how much there is constantly, like, I feel like there's so much noise, and if you'll forgive my language, there's so much shit on everyone's windshield that it can be really difficult to cut through that. And what tactics have you found to kind of cut through all the noise and cut through all the bullshit and cut through all the spam that we see on social media, and kind of graduate fans from being in that like passive fan base to being like, I'm not just seeing this, I'm dedicated to this, trying to graduate people up to the like super fan level?
I mean, I don't know that there's like a specific formula to it, and this isn't dodging the question. And in the one hand, like, we have this unprecedented ability that you could record a song and put it out in the universe without much cost that didn't exist that long ago. The challenge is there's also a lot of like not great music clogging the arteries of these services too. But I think as far as like graduating, fans, I think I don't have a real like, here's the formula. I'll just say that there isn't one, and there isn't what I could tell one artist starting out could be exactly the same as I tell another artist. One artist winds up at like a mile away, and one artist is like still standing there, and it's just that, at the end of the day, like, my job as a manager, from my perspective, like, our job is to help, working with all the other members of the team of an artist has, to get the artist in front of the court of public opinion, and then the court of public opinion votes, right? Like, that's the most basic way I could say it. And I think when it comes to converting superfans, the one thing I'll say is just make sure, again, it's like we've said it before, is just be really true and authentic, because people read through it, and like, what's going to work for Mariah Carey isn't going to work for Dave Grohl necessarily. I mean, maybe it would. I don't know, but I'm guessing it wouldn't. You know, so
Yeah.
I will say really quick is that I think that perseverance is really important too, because like if there is a windshield full of shit, was that the metaphor?
Dead bugs, maybe.
Yeah, right. Okay, yes, let's go. Yeah, let's do dead bugs. And I'm but a dead bug amongst a sea of other dead bugs. It's like I just want to keep dying.
Well, maybe that's not a good analogy.
No, I guess what I was saying is like I think, and this kind of goes back to the social media thing, but like because there is it's a hyper-saturated landscape, right? And it's like it's a beautiful thing and also a problematic thing that it's like so easy to be able to publish your own music. It's important for the democratization aspect. It's like difficult in terms of quality. And I think first you have to bring quality, right? Like the way that you're going to get ahead is not by being like I'm just going to do quantity, quantity, quantity and see what goes. Like you have to be like true to yourself, know who you are. Like what are the 5 words that describe who I am as an artist, and how is everything that I'm creating really cohesive and like around exactly the experience of me and my music that I want folks to experience, which is also a bit elusive and is a bit elevated and almost otherworldly, right? And then it's like, how are you persistent about getting that to folks because it's attention span and because of the market, and just ensuring like the quantity comes in how you're getting the music out. Like the quality comes in the music. And I think I personally have fallen, I've seen people fall where like they make a couple posts, they don't really go anywhere and you're like, oh, nobody's fucking with it. Like, sorry. And like, you know, at the end of the day, it's like if you really believe in it, like Tyler the Creator has really good talking points on this. He's like, I'm Tyler the Creator and I'm still promoting the album that I released last year. Like I'm out here really believing in me and like making sure that my output is mirroring that belief in me. So cultivating that authenticity, cultivating that belief in self, and then making sure you're really persevering and persistent about that, like out to people.
Yeah. We are going to take one more question, but before that, I just want to let you all know that we're going to be hanging out afterwards. I don't know if you got the memo. We're going to put on some music. We got some food behind the curtains, and we'll just be able to talk for another hour or so before we have to leave the building. So
they have individually wrapped bagels.
We got options. So just know the conversation continues. But as far as microphone questions, let's take one more. How about in the way back, just because it's like we got to show love to the back.
Okay, right on. Question about sync placement, and if anybody had any like success with that. That's it. Kind of just, I guess, getting your music into commercials, TV shows, movies, that kind of stuff.
Yes, but I don't really know how. Like I've definitely, I've worked with like, you know, there's all sorts of like sync houses out there that will take your music kind of on spec and they'll do 50-50 splits and put it into a database, and then, you know, music directors and music programmers and folks will come looking for music for commercials and TV shows and movies. And so I think there's, the name of one comes, I think Marmoset, I think, is in Portland. Like they're one great house, and there's a few others. So I think that would be somewhere where I would look into. As far as like kind of the bigger stuff, it tends to sort of like fall out of the ether in a maddening way. But all of that too, just, you know, there's a lot of relationships involved with, you know, the manager knows the head of music at, you know, Disney movies, and there's a lot of kind of horse trading going on in that world. And then there's also a lot of people out there that are programming music for movies that just love music and are combing the internet for cool shit, and they'll kind of, you know, hit you up and track down stuff that they really love. So that's a really evasive answer, but it's a good source of income if you can figure it out.
Yeah, my piece of advice is if you're going to work with someone who's saying they're going to pitch your music to film and TV, don't pay them a fee. A flat. I mean, they should be working off a percentage basis. Like
and it
they
should
bring
be
something
exclusive.
Non-exclusive,
yeah. If you do a publishing deal, that is more than likely going to be an exclusive situation where they are going to exclusively pitch your music to film and television. But yeah, I mean, we've had a lot. I mean, licensing has certainly played a big role in furthering the career of several of our clients. And I can't sit here and say that like there's any method to the madness other than you know, a showrunner or a music supervisor or a director really loved a song and loved a band, and they found, or an ad agency, and they picked the right song that worked, and it, you know, et cetera. I mean, there's songs that I've licensed, Such Great Heights by the Postal Service, not me personally, but we've licensed that song twice in the last 10 days. You know, that song is 22 years old. It just kind of happens.
Yeah.
So.
Do you have a last point to make on that or no?
I was gonna say, for the first time ever in my career, I got my song synced in a feature film that's coming out next week. And I'm just saying that to say because like it's been a dream of mine for a while, and it's like literally just because like one of my really close friends' boyfriend directed the film. So it's like you have to have like, you know what I mean? So it's just like kind of like one of those like, it's really like, and you can't game that. I can't strategize that. That's just like me being friends with people and then people like knowing of my music and being like, oh, I'm directing a movie. Like it's just, I wouldn't, but I think Marmoset and companies that are non-exclusive sync licensing houses are really dope and are highly recommended.
And you don't lose anything by if it's non-exclusive, like
it's
just,
passive.
It's
dope.
The low risk.
But also just don't expect that you're gonna like bring them on and you're gonna have a sync a week later. I mean, they're pitching thousands and thousands of titles.
Yeah.
You know, you're just putting yourself in a better position.
And I'll have the last word because I am the moderator. One of the beautiful things about Hollis's point right there is that going back to the messages in a bottle, like, and this is especially true when it comes to opportunities like sync. Like, I remember Lizzo, Truth Hurts had been out for 2 years, and then it got placed in a Netflix show, and it became her biggest song, and it took her career to a whole nother level. I've had songs that were 10 years old get placed, and so, you know, music is forever once it's out in the universe, and so the more that we put ourselves out there, the more that these things happen. And one thing I wanted to say with the earlier question is this is just one of my personal things that I really would implore you to do. I remember I took a photography class, and I'm a photographer as well, and the instructor made an extra point to have a whole section in the quarter about how as artists we should be pursuing free money, which are grants and scholarships and different types of opportunities that way. And she showed me her whole model. She had now I have a spreadsheet where any interesting opportunity, whether it be a residency or, like I said, a scholarship of some sort, they have open periods, enrollment every year. Maybe I missed it this year. I have it in my spreadsheet between March and the beginning of April. I can apply for it next year. And if it could be a skill. You end up writing grants for other people, but we all have a good pen. You're a songwriter. You know, we should be shooting these shots because the patron is the original supporter of the arts. And there's a lot of programs and nonprofits and different groups that are supporting the arts and want you and us to do our thing. So that's just one thing I wanted to put out there. Does anybody have any last words before we kick it? Thank you guys so much.
Thanks for having us.
Appreciate you. Come and have a bite. Come and say hi. Music, yeah?
What everybody